I keep a picture on my phone that my family begged me to delete. In it, my father is holding a cake shaped like a suitcase. My sister is smiling beside a cardboard sign that says, "Finally independent at 34. Everyone is laughing except me. They thought the picture proved I was the family burden. They had no idea it would become the first page of the folder that showed who had really been carrying them. My name is Marissa Cole, and for a long time my family had a very simple story about me. I was the daughter who came back home after life got too hard. I was the woman in her 30s who sat at the kitchen table with a laptop and called it a career. I was the one they whispered about at church lunches and family birthdays, the one my father described as still figuring things out, even when I was paying invoices he had forgotten existed. The truth was less convenient. I worked as an operations consultant for small companies that were too messy to grow and too proud to ask for help. I built schedules, negotiated with vendors, fixed broken billing systems, chased late payments, and cleaned up the kind of business chaos that never looks dramatic from the outside. Nobody claps when you prevent a disaster. They only notice when the disaster finally happens. 3 years before that picture was taken, I moved back into my father's house after my lease ended and my mother's health had started to slip. First, it was supposed to be temporary. I told myself I would help with mom, help dad with a few things at the office, save money, and leave when the house felt steady again. But houses like ours were never steady. They just had one person keeping the floor from cracking. My father owned Cole Printworks, a small printing and packaging shop on the edge of town. When I was a kid, the place smelled like paper, ink, and hot coffee. Local restaurants ordered menus from us. Churches ordered flyers. Schools ordered banners. My father, Raymond Cole, liked to say he built that company with his bare hands. He said it so often that everyone forgot other hands had been holding it up for years. After my mother died, Dad changed. Or maybe I just stopped making excuses for what had always been there. He became louder, sharper, more certain that everyone else was the problem. Customers were cheap. Employees were lazy. Vendors were greedy. The economy was unfair. And me, sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, was a daily insult to everything he believed work should look like. He respected sweat. He respected noise. He respected a man coming home with dust on his shirt and pain in his back. He did not respect a woman solving a payroll problem before breakfast. So, when he walked through the kitchen and saw me typing, he would say things like, "Must be nice making money in pajamas." Then, 10 minutes later, he would ask me why the paper supplier had locked his account, or why the school district had not paid their invoice, or why the delivery driver said the insurance certificate was expired. I answered because that was what I had been trained to do. I answered because daughters like me are praised when we are useful and shamed when we admit we are tired. My younger sister, Tessa, understood the family rules better than anyone. She had moved out years earlier, but somehow she was always around when there was food, gossip, or someone to blame. She posted motivational quotes online about protecting your peace, then came to Dad's house and called me a basement employee, even though I did not live in the basement, and she had not paid her own phone bill in 6 months. My Uncle Carl worked at the shop when he felt like it. Mostly, he stood near the back door with a cigarette, explaining how everything would be better if people had common sense. My grandmother June spoke softly, which made people think she was kind, but she had a way of saying cruel things as if she were offering a prayer. "You know, Marissa," she told me once, "a woman should not make her father wonder what he did wrong." I wanted to ask if fathers ever wondered what they had done wrong to their daughters. But I did not ask. I just paid the overdue software bill that kept the shop's orders from disappearing. The first year, I thought I was helping during a hard season. The second year, I realized the hard season had become a business model. By the third year, I had a spreadsheet hidden in a folder on my computer titled, "For My Own Sanity." It listed every payment I made, every vendor I calmed down, every order I saved, every late fee I covered, every account I restructured, every emergency that became invisible because I handled it before my father had to feel embarrassed. There was the $8,700 payment to keep the industrial printer under service contract. There was the payroll gap I covered when Dad forgot a client check would not clear until Monday. There were the utility bills for the shop, the insurance renewal, the rush paper shipment for a wedding venue order, and the tax penalty I paid because my father had ignored 3 letters from the state. When I tried to explain these things, he waved me off. "You send a few emails, Marissa. Don't make it sound like you're running the place." So I stopped explaining. That is one of the quiet traps in families like mine. They do not always lock the door. Sometimes they just make leaving feel like betrayal. They remind you that you have a roof over your head, even if you are the one keeping the lights on. They say, after all we have done for you, and somehow that sentence erases everything you have done for them. I stayed longer than I should have because I kept waiting for a different version of my father to walk into the room. The version who would say, I see you. The version who would notice that I had given up weekends, savings, sleep, and pride to keep his name printed on the front window of that shop. That version never came. What came instead was a Thursday night dinner with pot roast, green beans, and my father announcing that he had been more than patient. Tessa was there. Uncle Carl was there. Grandma June was cutting her meat into tiny pieces like she was preparing for a long show. Dad set down his fork and said, Marissa, it is time for you to stand on your own 2 feet. I looked at him and waited. He cleared his throat, enjoying the silence. I have allowed this arrangement because you are my daughter. But you are 34 years old. You need to stop hiding in this house and start acting like an adult. Tessa looked down at her plate, smiling. I asked him, are you saying you want me to move out? He said, I am saying I want you to become responsible. That was one of his favorite tricks. He never wanted to say the sharp thing plainly. He wanted you to bleed and thank him for the lesson. I said, give me a date. He blinked. What? Give me a date, I said. If you want me gone, say when. Uncle Carl laughed under his breath. Look at her, making demands from the free room. The room went still, but not because he had crossed a line. It went still because everyone wanted to see what I would do. I did nothing. Dad leaned back and said, end of the month. And maybe we will have a little dinner to celebrate your independence. Tessa laughed. We should get a cake. Grandma June said, sometimes public encouragement helps a stubborn spirit. I nodded, stood up, cleared my plate and washed it in the sink. Nobody noticed my hands were not shaking, because by then I already had an apartment. I had signed the lease 2 weeks earlier in a town 40 minutes away. I had accepted a long-term contract with a medical supply company that needed someone to rebuild their operations from the ground up. I had slowly moved my important documents, winter coats, books, and my mother's old sewing box into the new place while my family was busy calling me stuck. The dinner only confirmed what I already knew. They did not want me to leave because they believed in me. They wanted an audience for my humiliation. The party happened on a Saturday afternoon. I pulled into the driveway just after 3, expecting to grab the last 2 boxes from the hall closet and go. Instead, there were cars along the curb, balloons tied to the mailbox, and a folding table on the lawn covered with chips, soda, and a sheet cake. The cake was shaped like a suitcase. Someone had written Bon Voyage Marissa in blue frosting. Beside the garage, Tessa had taped a cardboard sign to a wooden stake. Finally independent at 34. She was recording on her phone when I got out of my car. There she is, she said, using that bright fake voice people use when they know they are being cruel but want it to look funny. The woman of the hour. My father stood near the grill wearing his old Cole Printworks cap. He had a spatula in one hand and a beer in the other. He smiled like a mayor at a parade. Well, he called out, look who decided to join her own launch party. People laughed. Some were relatives. Some were neighbors. A few were shop employees who looked uncomfortable but not uncomfortable enough to leave. Uncle Carl raised his cup and said, to Raymond, for finally cutting the cord. More laughter. I walked past them toward the house. Tessa stepped in front of me with her phone still raised. Any words for your followers? Maybe a lesson about saving money while living rent-free? I looked at the camera, then at her. Move. Her smile flickered, but she moved. Inside the house, the hallway smelled like barbecue smoke and lemon cleaner. My boxes were stacked by the front door. On top of one was a roll of paper towels, a can of soup, and a handwritten note from Grandma June. For your new beginning. Try not to waste it. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the performance was so complete. They had built a stage, written lines for themselves, invited witnesses, and decided I would play the ashamed daughter. I carried the first box to my car. A few people clapped. Someone whistled. My father called out, careful, she is not used to heavy lifting. That one got the loudest laugh. I put the box in my trunk, went back for the second, and noticed the cake sitting untouched on the table. My name was spelled right. That bothered me more than it should have. They could remember the spelling of my name when it was made of frosting, but not the weight I had carried. Before I closed the trunk, I took out my phone and snapped one picture. My father saw me. "What is that for?" he asked. "Memories?" I looked at the sign, the cake, the faces, the people smiling like cruelty was a family game. I said, "Documentation." The smile left his face for half a second. Then he laughed again because he still thought I was powerless. I drove away while they were singing a song they had made up about freedom. I did not cry until I reached the stoplight by the old library. Even then, it was not the kind of crying I expected. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It felt like my body was releasing a breath it had been holding for years. That night, in my new apartment, I sat on the floor because my couch had not arrived yet. I ate cereal from a mug and opened my laptop. There were 3 things left to do. First, I removed my personal credit card from every account connected to Cole Printworks, the printing software, the vendor portal, the cloud storage, the delivery tracking subscription, the emergency supply account. Anything I had quietly attached my name to because Dad had missed a deadline or forgotten a renewal. Second, I sent a formal email to every vendor I had been managing. It was polite. It was clear. Future approvals must come directly from Raymond Cole or the designated shop manager. I copied my father on each one. Third, I printed the spreadsheet. Not because I planned to sue him. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I knew what would happen next. A family that rewrites your life in front of witnesses will rewrite your leaving too. By Monday, they would say I abandoned them. By Tuesday, they would say I sabotaged the shop. By Friday, they would say they had no idea what I was talking about. So I made the truth heavy enough to hold. People sometimes ask whether I brought down my father's business. I did not. I did not cancel client orders. I did not delete files. I did not call customers and warn them. I did not damage machines or hide passwords or lie to anyone. I simply stopped being the unpaid system underneath the system. There is a difference between pushing someone into the water and refusing to be the bridge they keep setting on fire. For 3 days, nobody contacted me. That was the victory phase, I think. The part where they told each other how peaceful the house felt without me. The part where Tessa probably replayed the video and read comments from people who thought it was hilarious. The part where my father stood in his shop and believed he had finally taught me a lesson. Then Monday happened. The first message came from the paper supplier, not my father. It was a courtesy email saying Cole Printworks had an order on hold pending account verification. I did not answer because I was no longer the contact. Then the printing software sent an automated notice. Payment failed. Access would be restricted in 24 hours. Then a school administrator emailed my old address, asking whether the banner proofs for their spring fundraiser were still coming by Wednesday. I forwarded it to my father. No comment. No explanation. Just forward. At 9:18 that night, Tessa texted me. "Dad says the shop computer thing is acting weird. What password did you change?" I wrote back, "I did not change a password." She replied, "Don't be petty." I turned my phone face down. By Tuesday afternoon, Uncle Carl called twice. I let it go to voicemail. His first message was casual. "Hey kiddo, your dad is losing his mind over some vendor thing. Call the shop when you get a second." The second message was less casual. "Marissa, seriously, did you take yourself off the supply account? We have jobs due." I saved both messages. On Wednesday morning, my father called. I watched his name flash on my screen while I drank coffee at my own kitchen counter. My apartment was small, with thin walls and a heater that clicked too loudly, but nobody in it was calling me useless. I let the call ring out. He called again. Then came the text. "You need to stop whatever point you are trying to make." I stared at that sentence for a long time. Not "Are you okay?" Not "I am sorry." Not "We went too far." Just stop whatever point you are trying to make. By Thursday, the big order from Morton's Grocery had stalled because the shop's insurance certificate on file had expired. I knew exactly how to fix it. It would have taken 12 minutes. A phone call, 1 form, 1 payment, 1 upload. For 3 years, 12 minutes like that had saved my father from consequences. That day, I gave him back the 12 minutes. Tessa called that night. This time I answered. She was crying, but not in the way people cry when they are sorry. She was crying in the way people cry when the fire reaches their room. Marissa, she said, Dad is screaming at everybody. He says you locked him out of half the accounts. I said, I removed myself from accounts I was paying for. You could have warned us. I almost laughed. Tessa, there was a cake. Silence. She said, that was just Dad being Dad. No, I said. That was all of you being honest. She told me I was punishing everyone. She said people could lose hours. She said Dad might lose Morton's grocery. She said Grandma was upset. She said the family was under stress. I listened until she ran out of people I was supposed to rescue. Then I said I will meet Dad once. Public place. He can bring Carl if he wants. I will bring documents. After that, I am done discussing the business. The meeting happened on Saturday morning at a diner near the interstate. I chose it because the booths were small and the waitresses did not tolerate scenes. My father was already there when I arrived. Uncle Carl sat beside him, looking like he had slept in his truck. Dad had a cup of coffee in front of him, and the expression of a man prepared to forgive someone who had not apologized. I slid into the booth and placed a folder on the table. It was not dramatic. Plain black folder. Silver clip. 92 pages. Dad looked at it and scoffed. What is this supposed to be? I said, the part of the story you left out. He opened it with one hand like touching it properly would give it power. The first page was the picture from the party. The suitcase cake. The sign. Tessa smiling. Dad holding the spatula like a trophy. His face tightened. Cute, he said. Page 2 was the summary. Dates. Amounts. Accounts. Vendor names. Service renewals. Emergency payments. Loans I had never called loans because I still thought love meant making things easier for people who made me feel small. His eyes moved slower as he read. Uncle Carl leaned over, then sat back. Dad flipped another page. Then another. This is not accurate, he said. It is. You are counting things family does for family. I said no. I am counting things you called freeloading when I did them from your kitchen table. His mouth opened, then closed. I pointed to one line. That is the payment that kept the printer under service warranty. This one is the payroll transfer from last November. That is the vendor balance you told Carl was a clerical error. This is the software subscription you said was unnecessary until it stopped working. Uncle Carl muttered, Ray, I told you that software was important. Dad shot him a look. Then he turned back to me. You lived in my house. Yes, I said. And while I lived there, I paid enough to keep your shop alive and your pride untouched. He leaned forward. Watch your tone. There it was. The old reflex. When facts failed, reach for authority. For the first time in my life, it did not work. I said no. His eyebrows lifted. I said it again, softer. No. I am not watching my tone. I am watching the pattern. The waitress came by with coffee. Nobody spoke until she left. Dad rubbed his forehead. What do you want from me? That question almost broke me because part of me still knew the answer. I wanted him to be my father. I wanted him to look at those pages and feel shame, not inconvenience. I wanted him to say my mother would have been proud of me. I wanted him to understand that I had not left because I was selfish. I had left because staying was teaching me to disappear. But wanting something does not make it available. So I said, I want nothing from you. He looked confused. I continued, I am not coming back to manage the shop. I am not putting my card on your accounts. I am not taking vendor calls. I am not explaining software, insurance, payroll, taxes, or delivery schedules to people who laughed while I carried boxes to my car. Uncle Carl said, Come on, Marissa. Things got out of hand. I turned to him. You toasted him for cutting the cord. He looked down. Dad said, we were trying to motivate you. I said, you were trying to humiliate me into being grateful for less. His face hardened. You think you are better than us now? No, I said. I think I was useful to you and you mistook that for being above me. That landed. I saw it land even if he would never admit it. He pushed the folder back toward me. So what, you just let the shop fail? I took a second before answering. The shop was failing while I was there. I was just making the failure quieter. For once he had no quick reply. I slid a second envelope across the table. Inside was a list of bookkeepers, an insurance agent, a small business attorney, and a local operations firm that charged more per hour than I ever would have dared charge my own father. These are people who can help, I said. Properly. With contracts. With invoices. With respect. Dad stared at the envelope like it was an insult. You would make your own father hire strangers? I said, you made your own daughter feel like a stranger while she was saving you. His jaw worked but no sound came out. I stood up and took the folder with me. The envelope stayed on the table. As I left he said, Marissa. I stopped. For one strange second I hoped. Then he said, your mother would not have wanted this. The old version of me would have turned around. The old version would have defended herself, cried, explained, softened, promised to help just a little. The old version would have let him use my mother's name as a key to a door he had no right to open. I turned back and said, Mom would have hated the cake. Then I walked out. The weeks after that were messy but not mine to manage. Morton's Grocery canceled their order. 2 employees left. The landlord of the shop demanded a payment plan. Tessa posted a vague quote online about betrayal, then deleted it after someone commented, was this before or after the suitcase cake? The video of my party never went viral the way she hoped. It spread just enough for people in town to ask questions. That was worse for my father. He could survive being disliked. He could not survive being exposed as ridiculous. Grandma June mailed me a sympathy card with no occasion named. Inside she wrote, families should not keep score. I wrote nothing back. Because sometimes silence is not bitterness. Sometimes silence is a locked door. About a month later, Tessa came to my apartment. I almost did not let her in. But she looked different. Smaller maybe. Not physically. Just less certain that the world would rearrange itself around her version of events. She stood in my doorway and said, I watched the video again. I waited. She swallowed. It was mean. I said yes. She looked down. I thought it was funny because everyone else was laughing. That sentence told me more than an apology would have. It was not enough, but it was honest. I let her sit at my kitchen table. I made tea. She told me Dad had started blaming Carl, then the employees, then the vendors, then her. That was how people like my father survived. When one scapegoat escaped, they reached for another. Tessa said, I did not know how much you were doing. I said, you did not want to know. She nodded. We did not hug. Not then. Some stories do not heal just because someone finally says the right sentence. But before she left, she took out her phone and deleted the party video in front of me. It was a small thing. Small things matter when all the big things have been broken. My father held out longer. For 2 months I heard from him only through other people. The shop downsized. The front window sign came down for repairs and never went back up. He told anyone who would listen that I had abandoned the family business. I did not correct him every time. I had learned that truth does not need to chase every lie down the street. Then one rainy afternoon, I found a padded envelope in my mailbox. No return name. Just my address in my father's blocky handwriting. Inside was my mother's old measuring tape from the sewing box I thought had been lost. Wrapped around it was a note. Found this in the office drawer. Thought you might want it. No apology. No explanation. At the bottom, almost as if the pen had slipped, he had written, your mother used to say you were the organized one. I sat on the floor and cried. Not because it fixed anything. It did not. A sentence is not a repair. A keepsake is not accountability. But grief is strange. Sometimes a person who hurt you returns one small piece of what you lost, and your heart reacts before your dignity can stop it. I kept the measuring tape. I did not call him. 6 months later, my life is quieter than I knew life could be. I have clients who pay on time and say thank you without choking on the words. I have a couch now and plants in the window, and a neighbor who brings me muffins because she always makes too many. On Sundays I sleep late. Sometimes I wake up with panic in my chest, thinking I forgot to fix something at the shop. Then I remember. Nothing is on fire that I have to walk into. Peace felt strange at first. When you spend years being needed, not being needed can feel like being unloved. I had to learn the difference. Being needed can be a compliment, but it can also be a cage. Love does not require you to stay available for every emergency someone else refuses to prevent. People ask if I regret leaving the way I did. I do not. I regret how long I stayed. I regret every time I made myself smaller so my father could feel bigger. I regret teaching my sister that laughing at me was easier than knowing me. I regret mistaking endurance for loyalty. But I do not regret the folder. I do not regret the picture. I do not regret taking my name off accounts that never should have depended on me, because the day they threw me a party to celebrate getting rid of their burden, they gave me something I had needed for years. Proof. Proof that I was not imagining the cruelty. Proof that their version of love required an audience and a victim. Proof that when I finally stopped holding everything together, the truth did not destroy the family. It revealed what had already been broken. And if you are listening to this while carrying a family that keeps calling you heavy, I hope you hear me clearly. You are allowed to put it down. Not with rage. Not with revenge. Not because you stopped caring. Because you finally understand that love should not require you to disappear. That picture is still on my phone. I do not look at it often anymore. But when I do, I no longer see a woman being humiliated in front of her family. I see the exact moment she became free.